Now I would like to introduce our first speaker for Map Your Future Through an Updated Portfolio by Juliana McMillan-Wilhoit. Juliana is the owner of Tabule Spatial Services. She holds a decade of experience working with organizations to aid in their understanding of geospatial data and has worked for companies such as Esri and KPMG. Driven by the need to make an impact, Juliana utilizes her skills in map making and geospatial data analysis to make a difference in communities through her work at Tabule Spatial. Additionally, Juliana is a cheerleader of the geospatial community, hosting regular online networking events and doing one-on-one coaching.
Well, hello, everyone. I am so incredibly excited to be here. I want to talk to you about why you need a portfolio and how we can help map your future with a portfolio. Portfolios are one of the things that I absolutely love talking about. So why in the world should you trust me and why am I here? So I don't actually live in Wisconsin. I live right over the southern border in Illinois. I live in Lake County, Illinois, and I tell everyone that I do live in Wisconsin to describe my relationship to Chicago because that's how I feel. And I love driving just a little bit north to get cheese curds because somehow they sell them in the grocery stores in Wisconsin, but they don't sell them in our grocery stores. I don't understand how like 10 miles makes that difference, but it does. But anyway, I have, as my bio stated, I have a decade of GIS experience. I worked both in the public sector. I worked for the U.S. Department of Defense. I am trained as an urban planner and so have some local government experience through that. In my time working in the industry, I've hired for multiple GIS or geospatial adjacent roles. I created a portfolio, which really wasn't much of a portfolio, on a whim for a job application. And I ended up being offered that position. And I was told that the reason why they offered me the job, I didn't end up taking it, was because of the portfolio that I had. And so I was like, oh, okay. So like this thing that I threw together in a few minutes, that actually made an impact. I should maybe make more investment in this. So in the past year, one thing that I did was I conducted over 30 interviews with members of the geospatial industry, just trying to understand what they thought trends were, what challenges they saw, how they saw the profession and the industry going. And so I'm using that just sort of as evidence for ground truthing in terms of what I'm sharing. Again, all this is my experience, but to whatever extent I can, I also try to ground truth this with what other people are saying. And that also, so I've led a successful portfolio workshop and challenge that we'll talk more about at the end of this. But that also, I'm just really passionate about like investing in the careers of people. Last year with COVID, I ended up running an internship experience for students who had their internships canceled to create the Chicago Cultural Atlas to use maps to do data storytelling. And I just sort of say that in terms of that I've worked with a lot of students. I'm an adjunct instructor at North Park University as well. So anyway, sort of all of this is to say, I have some experience. I'm really passionate about portfolios and I'm super passionate about maps. So my goal with this session is that you are going to walk away with a better understanding of what a portfolio is, why you need a portfolio, and how to get started on your portfolio. Because honestly, the idea of starting a portfolio for me for many years seemed incredibly daunting. And so I hope that at the end of the session today, you will have just a little bit more information and feel equipped to get started. So I don't know if you have ever sort of felt this way when you've tried to navigate your career as someone who does something that is geospatially related, right? Whether you are a GIS analyst, a GIS tech, or perhaps something that's in a more adjacent field where you're doing something that's spatial. Have you ever felt like you don't quite know which way you're supposed to go, that some of the ways that people will talk about career progression in other industries don't quite make sense for your field? I at least have felt all of those things so many times before. And so my hope with this presentation is that you can walk away slightly encouraged, but also recognize that to not be trite and cliche, but that you really do have an ability to map your future and to really create a career story that makes sense for you. And so all that to say is that with what we're going to be talking about is that I want to just give you permission that you don't need permission to get started. So that it can be really daunting to just say, like, I'm going to invest in my career by making a portfolio. But just, especially when no one's asking you to do it, but I just want to remind you that you have the ability to start and to do that. So before we sort of get more into the nitty gritty about what a portfolio is, because you may be wondering those things, I do just want to talk about some definitions that we may be use that may be helpful in our conversations. In our conversation today. So this is sort of the Venn diagram that I have come up with that I think is just really helpful for grounding. So in terms of geospatial careers, I think that I see that there's sort of 3 different buckets. So there's super technical roles. So that would be somebody like a GIS analyst, a GIS technician, a remote sensing analyst, right? So that's somebody who is using geospatial software, doing geospatial analysis for a huge portion of their time. So that is sort of the technical GIS roles. Then we have the GIS or the spatially adjacent roles. So that could be an urban planner, a civil engineer, someone who's working in GIS education. So that's where you having a knowledge of geospatial is crucially important, but it's not the entirety of what your role is. And then there are non-geospatial roles. So that could be program administration, social services, any number of jobs where you're not doing something that's geospatially based. So you're probably wondering, great, there's 3 buckets. What in the world do these 3 buckets mean, and why are we talking about them? Well, I think it's really important as you begin to think about a portfolio, being really honest in terms of which bucket you are currently in and which bucket you would like to be in the future. So for example, if you are currently in an administrative role, so a non-GIS role, non-spatial, whatever phrase you want to use to describe it. So say that you are doing program management and you are managing budgets and spreadsheets, and maybe, that's what you're doing right now, but your passion is in things spatial, which is why you are here at this conference. It's really important to be honest about that's the experience that you currently have, but that maybe you want to move into a more GIS adjacent role. And so thinking about how can I craft my career story so that I can move into one of those roles. Or say that you are currently in a technical GIS role, you're a GIS technician, you map the stuff, you are really good at linear referencing, you're really good at spatial analysis, but you'd really like to move more into program administration. You want to help put the people out who do, who map the lampposts or whatever. Thinking through what are some of the career requirements, what are some of the things that are required to move my career slightly is really important as we begin to think through a portfolio. There's no right or wrong in terms of what bucket you fall into. There's no hierarchy or anything in between these, but just really important to think through where are you now and where do you want to go. I think having that idea of vision can be really helpful. I'm not trying to get too woo-woo on you in this. I'm just trying to help you be realistic. So I'm really active on LinkedIn, and recently I did a survey of, do you have a portfolio that showcases your work? And so, and if so, what platform are you using? And so what I thought was really interesting from this was that 50% of the respondents, so out of 144 people, a decent chunk of people said that they did not have a portfolio. And then 50% said that they did have a portfolio. So what that also is saying is that having a portfolio, we'll talk about what exactly a portfolio is here in a second, is a really great way potentially for you to stand out from the crowd because a lot of the competition doesn't have a portfolio. So what is a portfolio? At a basic level, a portfolio is a visual representation of your work. It is a collection of your data analysis projects. And I think that a portfolio can be something that is super formalized, i.e. it's a PDF, it's a website, it's a ArcGIS story map, but a portfolio can also be a Word document. It can just be a place where you keep a collection of projects that you have worked on that then you can go and show future employers or your current employer the ways, like the different ways that you have done analysis. I also think that portfolios are very, very important because they help humanize you and your different experiences. So for example, I have a really diverse background. I have had a lot of different jobs. I run a business. I taught English in Bulgaria for a year. I started a nonprofit. I'm also super passionate about maps. My portfolio is a place where I can bring those disparate elements together that make perfect sense to me and the people who know me, but I'm able to talk at greater length about why my time in Bulgaria matters, why maps matter so much. I can present me as a fuller person. I had a map-themed wedding. My husband and I, on our third date, made a ArcGIS web application, which these are, sort of ancillary things, but they also sort of go into my brand of like, I'm super into maps, and a resume doesn't necessarily explain how into maps and the power that I think that spatial analysis has to transform an organization. So before I go any farther, I just want to make sure, want to just check, are there any burning questions on what a portfolio is? I don't know if I'm actually allowed to do that, but okay.
That's fine by us. I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Also, somebody made a comment about my shirt. It came from my Etsy shop. So in case, you can email me afterwards to get a link to that. I am obsessed with this shirt. Okay, but feel free to type in the chat questions. I now figured out how to put it up so that I can make sure that I am trying to address them as we go. So the one thing that is super important is that your portfolio and your story are unique to you. So we're going to spend a few minutes here looking through some examples and talk about what portfolios are, but what's really easy to do is to look at someone else's portfolio and say, oh my goodness, they've done all this work. They have a cool portfolio. They've done a lot of things. The only thing that I do is I map lampposts, which is really important to my community, but how do I explain why that's important? Let's just take a step back and remember you matter and your career matters and the ways that you talk about your career matters, but your career is going to look different than my career. It's going to look different than the career of everyone else who's in this room. So as you look at portfolios, let's use this as a chance to get some inspiration, but let's not use this as a chance to compare yourself to others, because that's nothing really good is going to come of that. So here are just a few examples of different ways that you can structure a portfolio. So I used a QR code. I don't really know how well that's going to work, but I actually have on my website, if you scan that QR code, it actually brings up a list of 25 different portfolios that people have made. And so you can also go to tabulespatial.com/GIS portfolio list. It's a crowdsourced list, and would love it if you added to that. It's a Google Doc. But a portfolio can take any number of different formats. So on the far left-hand side of the screen, we actually have an Instagram account from someone who uses Instagram as a way to showcase their portfolio. This is someone who sells some of their work, right? But that's actually a super easy way if you want to create a portfolio, right? Where you don't have to host anything. You can just create, Juliana's portfolio. And that's a way that people can then see some of the maps and the work that you've done pretty easily as a link that you can send out. This next example is, this is somebody's website where they, have, it sort of functions many ways like a blog where you can click on, the 30-day mapping challenge and you can learn more about the work that they did during the 30-day mapping challenge. The other thing, this is an example from my previous version of my portfolio. Over here in the right is I used a PDF, and I sort of structured everything in my portfolio thematically. And so I was able to I structure things thematically. So as you flip through, you see sort of the different sorts of work that I've done. So this is just right at a high level, like different examples of a portfolio, and that there's, again, no right or wrong way for you to structure a portfolio. Thank you, Coulter, for putting that in the chat so everyone can access it if you want. And again, it is a crowdsourced list. So if you have a portfolio, if you find someone who has a portfolio, would love if you just make a suggestion and add yourself to the list, and then people can access it.
Question, Juliana, where on your site is the QR code hiding out at?
Where is the QR code going to?
No, where can I get to the link so I can share that out for folks who maybe didn't scan their screen? I don't even know if you can scan.
Oh, it's the same link. It's just like another way to get to the portfolio challenge list. They're the exact same thing. Okay. Yes, thank you. I didn't even think about like that we could just put things in the chat. So we've talked a little bit about what a portfolio is, right? But now let's chat about why I think you actually need a portfolio. So a portfolio is something that is super helpful for you to be able to demonstrate that you can write, that you can create, that you can communicate visually. It demonstrates that you have a really wide range of skills. So that you may be like super active and involved in your church, right? You could be the person who runs the church rummage sale. That might not be something that you have on your resume. I might argue that it should be on your resume, but there actually may be some really important skills that you have from, managing a bunch of high school volunteers to, dealing with getting stuff and delivering it, whatever it may be, right? That's something that you can include in a portfolio that can really help humanize you as a person, but also show a wide range of skills that you may not necessarily be able to demonstrate in the workforce. It's also a way that you can provide proof of the skills that you currently have. So you can show like, I've done this sort of analysis, I've done this sort of thing. Maybe I haven't done it in this job, but I've done it in the past, and that means that I can do it in the future. One way that some people also will use a portfolio is to show their development over time. So particularly if you're a student or a recent graduate, you can show like, this is where I started, where I knew nothing, and I've grown over time. And so if I've grown this much over the past few years, imagine how much more I can grow at your company or your organization. And again, a portfolio helps personalize you. But one other thing that I want to add, and I actually have a video coming out about this next week, is that a portfolio is not just something for you for when you go to leave your current job. So I used a portfolio when I was working for the Department of Defense, right? I talked about how I'd applied for a job and they offered it to me because I had a portfolio and I didn't take it. But I then really worked on enhancing my portfolio because I wanted to give my current employer more of a try. And so I used my portfolio as a means of doing internal networking to my organization. So I was able to show, hey, like this is stuff that I've worked on before, right? So you've probably actually gone to meetings with people, who may be in a different department or different agencies, people you work with ancillarily, and you may have brought a portfolio to a certain extent before, right? Where you bring an example of a map or an analysis that you've done, and you're like, hey, I think this would be useful to you, or this is what my team does. But actually having a more formalized portfolio can really be helpful for you to explain, like, these are the sorts of things that I can do. Use me more, or I'd really like to do more of this stuff. Can we do more of that? And that you're really helping other people understand the value that you do, and that the value that you bring, even if you're not looking for a new job. But a portfolio can be so helpful because we live in a visual culture. So these are just like some basic statistics. You all probably know it, right? That like a Facebook post that has an image with it performs a lot better than like a Facebook post that doesn't. And so all that I'm doing that to say is that a portfolio, depending on how you create it and you sort of categorize it, can just be a really helpful way for people to show that you know how to communicate visually, and that you are also tapping into the power of our visual culture. Now, here is probably the most controversial slide on the deck. Is it what format can a portfolio take? The answer is it can be any format that works for you. So a lot of people will say that it has to be an ArcGIS story map. I think story maps are great. A story map may not make sense for you. It could be a website. It could be on GitHub. It could be a PDF on a website or a printed out PDF. It could be Instagram. It could be a Word document. It does not matter what format your portfolio takes. I think from my perspective, what matters is that you actually have a portfolio. So let's talk now a little bit about how we actually start getting into the nitty-gritty of starting and creating your portfolio. So the first thing is that we need to start with the end in mind. So one of the various things that I did in my past was I was a high school English teacher. And so when I plan a lesson, I want to think, okay, what do I want people to come away from this English lesson? What's the goal of this English lesson? And then I want to, plan backwards. In the same way, you need to think about your portfolio as something that is, you need to think with that end in mind. And so you need to think about what are my goals with this? So for example, presuming you are looking to switch organizations or even within your current organization, do you want to be able to have a printed copy to bring to your interviews? So for example, you would want to use a standard paper size if that's the case, such as a letter or an A4 size so that you can afford to get it printed, as opposed to using something like landscape, right? That seems sort of simple, but as somebody who didn't start their initial portfolio with the end in mind and had everything be PowerPoint sized, and then I had to reformat everything, just a lot easier if you think through, I want this to be 8.5 by 11, and so I'm going to do that. Also think about if it's going to be, no matter if you think it's going to be mostly printed, it's really nice to be able to email a link to someone. So think about how it will read on the screen. So for example, an 11 by 14, it can be really hard to read as a PDF based off of like screen sizes and other things like that. So, so think through that. And so if you send somebody a portfolio and like on an iPad or on a smaller computer screen, they're having to zoom in to read the information, that's probably too small. Really important question is how will you need to edit it in the future? So make sure that you have access to a tool that you'll have the ability to access in the future. So for example, if you create a story map that's based on your current organization's ArcGIS Online, presumably you may not want to be sending that out for other job interviews, but also when you leave, will you still have access to it? Same thing with using a school account. You can make a story map using the free ArcGIS Online account. But just think about, will you have access to the software in the future? My portfolio is made primarily using Google Slides because I presume that a world in which there's not Google Slides anymore is a world in which they don't need GIS analysts, and so I'm probably fine. But also think about how are you going to share this with people? Are you going to embed it on a website? Are you going to use something like Google Drive? Will you use Issue? Issue is a really great website. It allows you to upload a PDF and then it's searchable. So it's actually a way that I find a lot of portfolios to get inspiration from. And then we're going to talk more about these last two questions here in a second, but I just want to preview them. Is really, right, as you think about starting with our end in mind, thinking through what is the unique value that you add. And so what are you going to be adding uniquely to the organization, or what are you adding that you can highlight in your portfolio? And also, how do you want to be able to position yourself in the future? So how do you, do you want to move from, from those different parts of the Venn diagram? Do you want to move from, being a GIS analyst to somebody who's GIS adjacent, or, where do you want to move? That is also something that's going to be really helpful as you think about creating your portfolio. So thesis statement, so many different names out there. But the idea with your special sauce or your thesis is that this is essentially your thesis statement, which is saying this is the unique value that I add to the world, and that you are then creating visual evidence to support that. So, right, if you think about your portfolio or your resume as an argumentative essay, right, which we all wrote plenty of those back in school, you have a thesis statement, which, says like, in this essay, I will argue that Juliana McMillan is the best GIS analyst for these 3 reasons, right? If this was a something like that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like a sentence like that, but the idea is that you have a clear and compelling vision and statement of like, this is the value that I am adding uniquely, and here are the reasons why. And this is where a portfolio can really help you shine in a way that a resume can be a little bit more difficult, because a portfolio allows you to showcase some of those skills and things out that you may not have that may not show up in the workplace, like running the rummage sale, being a member of a band, whatever those things are. That's something that uniquely can that a portfolio can really uniquely help you do. So really begin to think through what is that personal thesis statement, your special sauce, whatever you want to call it. So one way that I begin to think about this is called there's sort of, I guess, a Japanese teaching that's called the Icky Guy that has 4 different circles. I have 3 circles. And so the idea here is that is you begin to understand what your niche is, which is sort of at the middle of these 3 different things, so that you have both your passions, like, what are you really passionate about? I'm super passionate about maps. What are you talented about? I'm a really, really good data analyst, and I'm really good at bringing together lots of different types of data. Okay, well, what actually is the market demand? And so beginning to understand both, right? Because you can be really passionate about something, right? So like, I am really passionate about social justice issues and spatializing that data. Unfortunately, there is less of a market demand for that data or for that sort of work. There's definitely a need for it, but there aren't people who want to pay for it. And so figuring out, how do I balance all those different things? So as you begin to think about your special sauce, your personal thesis statement, this is then really important, right? And the reason why we talk about this is that you need to have a point of view. You are so unique. And I'm not just saying this to be like special snowflakey, but that you have a unique background in history that really shapes how you approach your career. That could be any number of things: being from an immigrant family, being from a low income family, not going to college, having gone to college, whatever those things are, those are actually really helpful in shaping who you are and how you show up in the world. And I think that we would all do better if we acknowledged those things. And so again, just sort of your thesis is like, I'm capable and awesome, and I am, perfectly capable to go after the type of role that I am interested in going after. So let's think for a second then about how we can structure a portfolio. So human beings love stories, right? You love it when I share a little bit of personal information about myself, right? There was some stuff in the chat about loving, the information about my 3rd date with my husband. And my guess is, because I shared that as a story, you're more likely to remember that than, I guess you wouldn't have known it otherwise, but right. But we're drawn to stories. We're drawn to our personal information. But part of why we love stories is that there's this idea that there's a beginning, middle, and end. So that we tend to just like things that have all of those things. And so I think it's really important for you to consider structuring a portfolio having a beginning, middle, and end. And again, the whole way that you do this is it needs to support your thesis of, I am an awesome individual who adds a lot of value, and I am great, and I am capable. So the way you can think about your beginning is you could have an introduction, you could have a table of contents. So in the beginning of my portfolio, I just have an introduction page where I just give a little bit of information about who I am and why they are potentially looking at my portfolio. Then we get to the middle part of your portfolio. And this is sort of the heft of it. And this is where there's a lot of questions about how do I even think about structuring a portfolio? So, you could think about structuring it chronologically or reverse chronologically. So saying, in 2020, I did this sort of work. In 2021, I did this work. In 2019, I did this work. Obviously keep it chronologically, unlike I just did there. But that's an option for you, is to structure it chronologically. This can be really good if you're trying to demonstrate that you've had progress over time, or if the work that you have done has been like really seasonal. So if you're out, tagging lizards one year and tagging turtles the next year, maybe doing something chronologically would make the most sense. The way that I have my portfolio structured is thematic. And I think that this is what works the best for most people. So I group sort of like projects together. So I have a page that's dedicated to the web applications that I've built. I have a page dedicated to my training and my education. I have a page dedicated to data documentation, which is my favorite thing ever, but everyone thinks is really boring. And so that's where I've taken, sort of like some key things that I've done across multiple projects, and I put them together thematically. But you could also say, like, here is, regression analysis that I've done. Here's data cleaning that I've done. And maybe those are just like very much more like project specific. Whereas for me, I'm taking sort of like themes from across multiple projects. Also, depending on what sort of work you do, it could be really cool to look at the scale of projects. So looking at things that are statewide, countywide, citywide, parcel level. I've seen a few portfolios that do this, and I just think that they are super cool. I'm also really jealous because they get to work at so many different levels, and I think that that's cool. But again, right, the goal here is that you need to think through what structure makes sense for you and for your particular career needs, and again, fitting in with that with your personal thesis statement. And then we want to talk about the end, right? So you don't want to just sort of end it, right? You want there to be some sort of ending. So that could be a conclusion of like, hey, like, you looked at my stuff, like, this is, these are things. You could talk about where you want to go. So what sort of job do you want to have? What sort of work do you want to be doing? One thing that has been so incredibly successful and worked really well for me is that I have references at the end of my portfolio. So I had the people who I would generally have asked for references for if I was getting a new job, as well as people who have known me for a long time. I actually had them write a paragraph of social proof in terms of, Juliana's really great. She excels in these areas, and that I've gotten feedback from people that they have really, really liked that, because again, it's providing that social proof of, wow, like, Juliana can actually do the things that she's saying that she's doing. Yes, in a job, hiring process, those people would probably still call my references to talk to me, but this is still a really great step that you're helping yourself get ahead a little bit in that application process. And again, even if you're not looking for a new job, collecting those references can be really helpful in case something changes, or a boss moves on, somebody dies unexpectedly, just to be able to have sort of that evidence that of their support for you can be just so helpful. But one question that I get asked all of the time is, but what if most of my work is classwork, or also what if most of my work is this sort of thing, right? Like, I currently map lampposts and I do lamppost data QA, but that's not the sort of work that I want to do forever. And so here's the things that I would have to say to that. The first of all is to own it. That this is the experience you've had and the opportunities that you have had. So totally own it. I still have things in my portfolio that are from grad school, which I graduated from grad school 5 years ago. And that was in part because I got to work on some cool projects, but also that's just sort of the experience that I've had. I think what's also really important is for you to explain the why. Why does this matter for the job that you want, that you either lack that experience or that you do have that experience, right? So if everything you have is from school, or if everything you have is like post QAing, what skills are transferable from the work that you have done to the work that you do want to do? And then the last thing is that you want to then identify gaps and work on filling them. Right. And so again, so the last time was sort of focused specifically on students, but again, I think people will oftentimes undervalue all of the other skills that you have learned in a job. Have you learned to work with really difficult people? Yeah, maybe figuring out how to say that can be difficult, but that's actually a really important skill. Or have you learned project management? Have you learned how to turn things in on time? Have you developed interesting new tools and processes? I really think that a portfolio is a really creative way that you can showcase those things uniquely together. Right, as well as you have the opportunity to talk about the things that you have done outside of your typical 9 to 5 work hours. So let's talk though quickly about how you can fill some of the gaps within your own portfolio. So right, again, I'm going to keep saying this, but I think it bears so much repeating, is that it's so important for you to own the particularities of your past. So what skills have you learned? Have you learned project management? Have you learned data assurance? Have you learned data quality? That I just can't underestimate, just like particularly women, but I think both men and women will do this as well. It's just like own that particular experience you have. But the one thing that's been really transformational for me is to do a passion project, or Chris Harrison calls those permissionless analyses, which that is where you are saying, I think that there's a gap here, and I want to use my skills to fill that gap and to try and help either push myself forward or push the world forward in a little way. So examples of, these are passion projects that have gotten a little bit big, but I've seen somebody who just started mapping where Black Lives Matter protests were last year. That was something that nobody asked them to do, but they just started doing that. They did that as an individual. People have looked at restaurant closings in small towns in the Midwest and seeing, where are they? How are towns being impacted? You can just sort of look and say, okay, if I were to have, this sort of job, whether that's inside your organization or outside of it, what skills would they really want to see that I have, and how can I work on filling those? And I think that a passion project is hands down so great. Oftentimes people will think, okay, I need to take a class, and then I need to take another class, and I need to make this huge, time investment. And I'm a huge fan of education, but I think that sometimes we can use education to stall us from actually achieving things within our career. So we're going to look at a few portfolios here in our last little bit of remaining time, but I did just want to share a quick checklist for you to think through as you create a portfolio. So think about having an introduction. Who are you? How is this going to be structured? Make sure that you balance your content so that one project doesn't take up 12 pages and another project takes up 1 page, that were equally important. Making sure that you have diverse projects or diverse elements, right? Again, these don't necessarily have to be work projects. We're talking about anything within your life. It's always a great idea to have somebody look at your portfolio. Does it make sense? Do you have typos? Do you spell it GSI instead of GIS? All those things. But the most important thing is making sure that you have that end goal in mind. Both the end goal when you both start making your portfolio, but also the end goal in terms of what you are interested in doing within your career. So we are now going to actually, if I can get my screen to work. So this is the document that I have. Again, please feel free to make suggestions or edits to it. But I just wanted to have us have a quick, just take a few minutes to look at some examples of portfolios. So Matt Yoder is somebody who I went to grad school with, and so Matt is a urban planner who now works for the Champaign-Urbana Transit Authority. But one thing you can see super quickly in this portfolio is Matt Yoder is a developer for good. You have an idea very quickly about what Matt Yoder's personal value proposition is both that he's a developer and he's interested in things that are good. And so, you know, he's worked on a variety of different things. You know, you can see for him, he sort of labeled them. So there is a way that he has labeled this chronologically, both so you can see things over time. But oh yeah, so sorry. So we have like, he's both a developer for good, he's a planner for good, a data analyst for good, and a designer for good, right? So those are the ways that he has sort of categorized his website. Again, there's no right or wrong way here, but what you can see is, you know, he's for good in these few areas. So again, you do whatever makes the most sense for you and your career, but this is just a way to get you an idea to get you started. One thing, and so for him, he also provided the skills and competencies in terms of like the software and other things that he used. One thing that I recently just found is that Google Sites, so that is sites.google.com, actually now has a really robust portfolio template that they are giving out for free. And so if I just go here, so this is where you don't actually have to pay to use Google Sites if you have a Gmail account, and you can buy a domain for like $10, which I highly recommend, although you can get started without having a domain. And so if you're interested in creating a website, this is actually a really great way to start, where this is their portfolio template, and obviously you fill it in, but you can have your projects and other things, and then they link out to other pages. Okay, I was just really impressed in terms of how easy that was. So another example is, so this is Katie Berg, or Kate Berg. So she has created both a website version on GitHub as well as a story map version. And so, where you see for her, the idea of being a traveler, thank you for stopping by is important. She's based in she's based in Michigan, and being a Great Lakes person is really important to her and to her brand. And so, but you can see, like, I was raised in California and now live in Michigan. So, this is one that's more of a, at least on this first tab, it's more just like about who I am, but that, and I am super, super stoked because I got to her on Twitter that she didn't have a Matt Memes page. And I am so excited that she does, because I think this is actually like the greatest thing that she adds to the world. And so, yeah, so anyway, this is just sort of an example. You can scroll through things up at the top. Parker Ziegler, hopefully these work. And so, showcasing what tools you work with. You can go to maps, there we go. This has changed since I looked at it originally. And just some really interesting, analysis that has been done, right? So essentially, right here, we just have sort of like paragraph and maps, as in contrast to how Matt's was, where you had to click on the piece of analysis to get additional information. Again, my hope with showing you all of this is that it is not to say that there's a right or a wrong way to do this, is that there are tons of different ways that you can do this, and that it is really up to you in terms of how you want to express the value that you have in your career and in your life. So if you're looking for inspiration, one website that I really like is Issue, and you can, I linked to this. This is an urban planning portfolio, which, there's sort of the table of contents, there's sort of background in terms of analysis that they have done. But one of the great things on Issue is that you can upload a PDF and that it becomes searchable. So you actually search for GIS portfolio. You can actually find a lot of different portfolios. So some of these are more recent than others, but this is both a place for, if you want your portfolio to be findable, it's some place you could consider publishing it, but it's also a place where you can potentially find some portfolios to get inspiration. Again, we don't want to copy the work that other people have done, but I think it is perfectly appropriate to get inspiration from the careers of other people. So I recognize that we are coming up to the end of our time here. So I did just want to put this back in full screen. So just also want to remind you again that done is better than perfect. And so it is so important to just make sure that you get something done. And it may not be completely perfect. My portfolio is a work in progress. And but that's okay, and it's better to just like take that step in your career. So that concludes what I have to share right now. Just wondering if there are any questions that anyone has.
Ooh.
Oh, do I have a list of portfolio don'ts? That's a really great question, and actually I've been considering writing a blog post on it. I tend to not like the idea of doing portfolio don'ts because I don't want to shame anyone in terms of decisions that they've made, like with the way that they've made a portfolio. Because again, I don't think that there's necessarily a wrong way to do it. So like don'ts would be like having typos, having dead links. Those are some of the don'ts. But because I'm so platform agnostic, and I think it's just better to have something than to not have anything. Because one thing that I didn't talk about is that I actually send out a reminder at the end of every month, but that I block time off the last Friday of the month for me to update my portfolio, and I just take screenshots of the work that I've done that month and I put it in a folder on my computer, which is really helpful for annual performance time, but also just so I can remember some of the cool things that I've worked on.
I think that brings up a really good point, Juliana, and that these portfolios for everybody really are living, breathing documents if we play this out well. Like, I'm guilty of having a set it, forget it portfolio. And I think the last time I updated it was when you were getting out of grad school.
Yep. Yeah. And again, like, I may not update my portfolio every month, but I at least think, what have I done this month that I can add to my portfolio? And so it's things like, and a big thing is just like creating visual evidence of that, because a portfolio is visual. So, I took a selfie of myself before I started talking today. So I now have so I have a visual evidence of me like talking at a conference. I also took a screenshot of this time, right? Which again, like, those are sort of weird, but that's like me beginning to think through how can I create visual evidence? And I'm not going to go update my portfolio this afternoon, but it goes in the portfolio folder on my desktop. Sorry, I'm trying to read this last question, but I think I'm probably also at time. So Oh, like with the various jobs that people have, I think that like, so I was actually talking with somebody right now, like who works in IT and who hasn't had a GIS job, but is like working to transition into that. And I think it's actually really important to talk about like that past, right? Like working at McDonald's or working, you know, as an admin or whatever you've done has really helped shape who you are now. There are ways that you can create evidence of that, and a portfolio, I think, can showcase that in ways that a static resume, like 3 lines on a resume of consistently surpassed burger flipping quota by 150%, but showing, you know, I built a team, I built camaraderie. Those are things that a portfolio can uniquely do. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. I am just so honored that I got to come spend some time with you this afternoon. It is just, I don't know, it's just an honor to have you like, consider, you know, my thoughts as you think about your career. So thank you so much.
And thank you, Juliana.